silence our phones. Did we say that already? Yeah, I know. It's a drag. TikTok will have to wait. Jeff Libman is a teacher, writer, tutor, mentor, musician, Instacart shopper, former Uber driver, and most notably the composer and voice of the original Potbelly Sandwich Shop radio jingle. Give us a tune.
Good vibes, great sandwiches, Potbelly.
That is how you retired and drive a Porsche now. Congratulations, Jeff Libman. His book, An Immigrant Class, Oral Histories of Chicago's Newest Immigrants, you need to talk to Nestor about immigrants, chronicles the lives of recent immigrants to Chicago in text and photographs. Jeff has been an English teacher at Truman College for 3 decades. Woo! And prior to that, he coordinated the resettlement of Tibetan refugees to Chicago. And his bands, what the hell else have you done, Jeff, for God's sakes? You're such a do-gooder. His bands, Check with Lucy and the Jujus, frequent summer both music festivals and his front porch in Evanston. He has written for the Chicago Tribune, Chicago National Radio, National Public Radio, Chicago Public Radio. But if you want to hear a really good story, ask him about his exploits in the jungles of Borneo. Please say hello to Jeff Libman.
I'm glad I got the applause at the beginning. That's awesome. Let's hear it from Madam Zuzu. I'm a 14-year-old hormonal runt attending Highland Park High School right here. And I know I'm a hormonal runt because I'm 14 and because the first gym class that we have is wrestling and you have to weigh in. And as I weigh in, I'm 103 pounds. That's with my Jufro and the hair pick. As a freshman here at Highland Park High School, you have to take a foreign language. And so when the green and yellow and orange paper came out, we had paper back then, and we had to choose a foreign language. There was Italian and German and Latin, Hebrew, French, and Spanish. And I chose Spanish. Why did I choose Spanish? Don't ask me, I'm 14. When I walk into my Spanish class the first day, boom, I walk in the door and in front of me, at the front of the classroom, is a big, blonde, buxom behemoth of a Bavarian woman named Mrs. Shoden. She's our commander. She's got, did anybody go to Highland Park High School? No? Okay. She's got blonde, straight hair, bangs here, flowing down the side of her head like she's peeking out a little window. It looks like she's going to grab 8 steins of beer and serve them to us and say it's in Spanish. She's wearing the classic 1977 tight-knit sweater across her bust, wide horizontal stripes of brown and ochre and mustard and light brown and dark brown and medium brown and extra medium brown. And she's going to be teaching us Spanish. She's got every boy's attention. And at the beginning of the first day of class, she changes everybody's name and gives us all a Spanish name. Of course, today that would warrant cancel culture because we would be culturally appropriating something. But back then it was called learning names. So she starts speaking Spanish to us, and she does not speak English for the rest of the year. And the first day of class, she starts asking questions and going up and down the rows. And the first student is Steve, who has now become Esteban. And she asks Esteban, ¿Cómo estás, Esteban? And of course, none of us had any idea what she's saying. ¿Cómo estás, Esteban? Bien? Mal? And he says, bien? And she says, oh, fantastico, repita. And everybody repeats, estoy bien. And then she's on to the next student, Julieta, who used to be Julie, who's got her head on the desk. I don't know if it's because she's 14 or she's tired or because she doesn't want to be in Spanish class. And Mrs. Shilgan, of course, says, ¿Cómo estás, Julieta? And she doesn't really know what to say, and Mrs. Shilgan puts her head on her hands and says, Cansada. And she says, Cansada, and Mrs. Shilgan writes these words on the board, and we all repeat to all the girls in the class, Estoy cansada, repeat that, and they repeat, and to all the boys, Estoy cansado, and we repeat. And we're speaking Spanish the first day of class. And I attribute all of my Spanish, which is actually not that bad, to my freshman Spanish teacher, Mrs. Shilgan, and her tight-knit sweaters. 14 years pass, and I'm in Kathmandu, Nepal. By the way, all the great mystical, magical places of the world rhyme with Kathmandu, just so you know. Timbuktu in Mali, Ouagadougou in Burkina Faso, Machu Picchu in Peru, and of course, a little shout out to Madame Zuzu's. I'm there after leaving New York City, a great job working for the public television station there, but a lousy life, and I'm looking for something else, and along with my brother, who's here, we're traveling through Asia and Southeast Asia, and I wind up staying in Kathmandu, Nepal for quite a while, and I have a friend who's teaching English at the hopefully named language school for kids called the Speed Language Institute, and she is taking a week off and needs somebody to substitute in her class and asked me if I'll do it. Now let me tell you what my qualifications are for this. I speak English. That's not what you want. There are 3 billion people on the planet that speak English. That's like a pilot looking for someone to sit in and asking a passenger. Just because they're in the plane doesn't mean they know what they're doing. Also, I have 0 teaching experience. So when she asks me if I'll do this, of course I say, yes, of course. And then I'm sort of shocked, thinking, what am I actually going to do in this class? And bingo, the next idea that comes to me is
teach Spanish.
Mrs. Shilgan, of course. Well, her sweater. But then I start thinking about her, and I think, I'm just going to do what worked for me as a freshman in Highland Park High School. And so I start thinking about her techniques and her processes and the way she worked with students. So I walk into the Speed Language Institute with these 11, 12, 13-year-old little runts. And I do exactly what she did. I start speaking English. I ask them for a beat. I put sentences on the board. I put words on the board. It's fantastic. It's a great week. I feel like I'm brilliant. Well, it's good to take credit for somebody else's brilliance, but it's a great week and it's exhausting and I have a great time. And I decide at that moment that I need to thank Mrs. Shilgan. And so I pull out one of those, for those of you who know what letters are, I pull out what used to be a traditional airmail letter. That's a blue onion skin piece of paper. It serves as its own little package. You write your letter on one side, you fold it twice, you flip the tabs. You're going to do it for me right here, right? You lick it, you put the address on the other side, and you send it off. And so I sit down and compose a letter of gratitude to Mrs. Shilgan. And I simply thank her for teaching me. She, of course, has no idea that I was listening to anything going on, but somehow things got through to me. And I write this letter, and I fold it, and I lick it, and I go to the post office and get a couple stamps, which weigh more than the letter itself. And on the address side of the letter, I write, Mrs. Shilgan, Highland Park High School, Highland Park, Illinois. I have no idea if she's alive. I have no idea if she's still teaching. I don't even know the address of the high school. But one thing I learned in Asia was live with intention and let go. And so I did my deed. I got the stamp stamped, dropped them at the post office, and that was it. it was up to the universe to see if she was going to receive the letter. Another 14 years pass. I'm now 42 years old, and I'm actually an English teacher, a language teacher, and you heard I teach at Truman College, where I've been for 30 years, just about, yeah. And I work with immigrants and refugees. I teach English as a second language, writing, and I'm super interested in stories, not a surprise. And I'm interested in the stories of my students. I'm not that interested in the politics or the policy, but I want people to understand what immigrants and refugees go through to make the choice to leave home and family and familiarity and cuisine and climate and culture and position and pride and everything else to an open book of mystery. And so I set out to write this book called An Immigrant Class, and I'm successful at what you think is the most difficult part of writing a book, and that's getting it published. But I get it published and I have 2,000 books weighing 3 tons sent to me in my basement, my parents' basement, my brother's basement, anybody's basement. And now the job is to sell books. Should have thought about that before. So now you're thinking, well, of course, sexy book tour. That's what authors do. They do those sexy book tours, right? Where everyone comes out to hear you talk about your book and they want you to sign an autograph. Let me tell you what book tours are, okay? Book tours are somewhere between 6 and 8 people gathering in a church basement, maybe a school, maybe a bookstore, maybe a library. They're mostly there for the cookies and the cider. So if you've got a town to feed, tell them an author's coming. On this particular night, I'm actually speaking at the bookstall in Winnetka. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. And I'm expecting a big crowd because I hear the cookies are particularly good. And I begin speaking. There are about 8 people there. Half of them are people I know. A couple of them are people who just need a rest from walking around the bookstore. And I think 2 people are definitely there for the cider and the cookies. And I start talking about the first person in that book. His name is Eli Ramirez. And briefly about Eli, he comes from Guatemala. He traveled through Mexico with 40 people in an empty gas tank truck where he was abandoned. He then crossed the border, had to drink his own urine in order to survive. And then 2 days later is on a bus to Chicago, where the next day he starts work as a dishwasher at Charlie Trotter's restaurant. Wow. Life is crazy. As I'm telling this story, in the distance, coming from the front door, I see this big, blonde, buxom, Bavarian behemoth of a woman walking towards me. She's got short, blonde bangs, hair falling down the side of her face. I'm convinced that underneath that winter coat is the same sweater. And of course, I'm left kind of speechless for a minute. I can't believe that this teacher who I had 28 years ago, who I sent a letter to 14 years ago, is walking in the door. And of course she sits down and I finish my talk, and afterwards we of course catch up and we go through all of the niceties of, are you still teaching and what are you doing, and is Mr. N still the calculus teacher, and etc. And of course the one thing I'm not asking is the one thing you're all asking right now, which is, did you get my letter? And so after a few minutes, I say exactly that. I said, Mrs. Shogun, you're my, and by the way, Mrs. Shogun has not changed a bit. You know, when you're a high school student, you have no idea how old your teachers are. It could be 25, 39, 53, 70, you have no clue. She looks exactly the same. And I looked at her and I said, Mrs. Shogun, 28 years ago I was in your freshman Spanish class. 14 years ago, I sent you a letter from Kathmandu thanking you for teaching me Spanish. Did you ever receive the letter? And without hesitation, Mrs. Shogun reaches into her purse and pulls out the letter and says to me, teachers don't throw things like this away. I'm a teacher. I know that now. Today, teachers might get a thank you digitally sent with the exact same font. It winds up in an inbox. That's not where letters from students to teachers are supposed to be. They're supposed to be wrapped in a rubber band in a shoebox. You can open them, you can see the handwriting, you can remember the student, you can smell the kitchen it was written in, you can feel who those students are. And I have a shoebox full of those letters just in case someday someone asks me if I ever received their letter. I don't know if this story makes you believe in the power of the universe, in something magical, or maybe just refound belief in the post office. Thank you.
When you started talking about her sweater, I'm like, uh-oh, here we go. The feminist in me was worried for a minute, but you brought us back home. Thank you, Jen.
You have that sweater in your closet, don't you?
Yeah, I do. All right, good job. Thank you so much, Paige. That was wonderful. Thank you, thank you. Are we still okay there? Are you guys okay?